Hey everybody, it's me, Danielle. I was watching my last video and I realized that I left off a very important detail about my Turner syndrome. I cannot talk tonight. I left out a very important detail about my Turner syndrome diagnosis story, which is what led to my diagnosis. Maybe I touched on it a little bit in my last video, but I'd like to go more into details right now. Okay, so when I was in kindergarten, I started to fall off the growth chart. I'd always been short, and my growth rate had always been much slower than the average child's, but it was never anything to really be alarming to doctors or my parents. But once I started kindergarten, my growth rate rapidly declined, and it got to the point that it was a little bit concerning because from the time I was about 6 to the time I was about 8 years old, my growth rate rapidly decreased, and it would almost be a fair statement to say I stopped growing. I did grow, but it was at such a slow rate it was almost undetectable to the untrained eye. It was something I was very self-conscious about at the time because, like I mentioned in my last video, it was kind of something my peers liked to poke a little fun at me for. You know, it's just what kids do. And it was also just something I was very self-conscious about. But after almost 2 years of not growing, my parents ended up taking me to a pediatrician. She had some kind of specialty. I'm not entirely sure what it was. I know she wasn't a pediatric endocrinologist because this doctor actually referred me to a pediatric endocrinologist who was the one to diagnose me with Turner syndrome. But anyways, after the pediatrician who we went to see studied my chart, she obviously found it concerning that a 8-year-old child almost hadn't grown for 2 years, which is how I ended up being diagnosed. She'd sort of explained to my parents what she thought it could be. I don't think she really told them that I had Turner syndrome, but I think she probably listed that as a possibility of why I might have stopped growing. I kind of talked to my mom about it recently, and as it turns out, even though she was a little bit shocked when I was diagnosed, it wasn't as surprising to her as I originally thought. But anyways, back to the point. The reason I was diagnosed is because I fell off the growth chart, which I actually think is probably the most common reason why females with Turner syndrome are diagnosed, is because of, well, for lack of a better way to put it, we're shorties. And that's what, for a lot of us, that's what leads to our diagnosis. I know there are a lot of other ways in which a woman could end up being diagnosed with Turner syndrome, but I just think that's the most common. I might have to research it more, but I'm like 90% certain that that's the most common thing that leads to diagnosis. Like, out of all the women I've talked to with Turner syndrome, almost all of us have said, it's because of our short stature. But anyways, I just kind of felt like I hadn't finished off my Turner syndrome diagnosis story, and I just kind of wanted to put a bow on it. I like puns. Anyways, have a good evening, and thanks for watching. Bye.